Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of r/malicious compliance. In today's episode. Fine. I won't wear those boots anymore. You win. Another tale of me in dress codes. At least it looked nicer, right? Sure thing, boss. Before we get started, make sure to subscribe so you will never miss a video. So let's get started. Fine. I won't wear those boots anymore. You win. Another tale of me in dress codes. Background. If you read my Recess MC story, then you already know I'm not a fan of dress codes for the sake of dress codes. So when I left for boarding school, I was utterly thrilled to go to a school that didn't have any uniform at all. Okay, so it's not really that I have a problem with dress codes. I have a problem with conforming. So if you say socks have to be black or blue, 99.999999% of people will assume that you mean navy blue. I'm the person who would show up with sky blue. Just to silently stand out for a day. Just to give a smirk to the 5 other people who'll think, well, they did just say blue. Just to highlight to the bureaucrat who wrote the rules that they're not as airtight as they thought they were. In short, I am, as my hubby would say, a brat. It's just fun to me to show people that either / or doesn't always have to be your only choices. We'll just say I was an adventurous dresser. I liked unusual combinations, and had I been encouraged instead of discouraged, and taught how to sew, I very probably would have ended up as a low-level fashion designer. Clothes were like paint to me after an entire childhood in the same plaid. I wanted to mix colors and textures and brushes. Boarding school is not really a colorful, choose-your-own-adventure kind of place. Well, though I was a precocious child, I was never a rule breaker, save for very calculated rule breaking in my previous story. My mother always said voodoo daughter's obedient and well behaved. She will bend a rule into a pretzel. But she'll never intentionally break one. She was the kind of parent who had to carefully word rules and restrictions when leaving me to my own devices, but also be careful not to put ideas into my head, at the same time. Basically, if you give me the impression that you believe something is ironclad, I'll pick it apart just because I enjoy the mental exercise of seeing if it really is ironclad. But if you're a jerk, I'm going to find the worst way to show you it's not ironclad. My mother firmly believed that critical thinking is the key to success in life. If you can assess a problem and find a path to a solution, then you don't need to know everything. You just need to know how to find answers. Mind you, this was about a decade before Google and smartphones, so I don't blame parents today for different mentalities. But I do still think I would raise my kids this way if I were going to have any. So I had been raised to believe that the people who get ahead in life are the people who don't just say apple when asked what that red round thing on the desk is. You pick it up. You turn it over. You note the feel and the weight. You mark the smell and the reflections in the wax. And you file that away for later. Never know when someone's going to ask you what the bottom of an apple looks like when there are no apples to look at, right? Anyhow, when you spend your life mentally picking up every problem, question, and object so you can flip it over, turn it inside out, change the colors, etc. Mundane things like school handbooks actually become a bit fun. The story. I went to a boarding school with 2 types of dress code. We had classroom dress, which was exactly what it sounds like. We were basically expected to look like young professionals. All the normal rules you would expect. Skirts below the fingertips for girls, shirts and ties for the boys. The handbook was pretty specific, as most are. The alternative was what we could wear in our free time town dress, and it was the standard we were expected to dress to when seen in public off campus, or just spending time in the students' lounge. This was more relaxed, but still rules to keep the girls from wearing anything too sexy, or the boys from looking too ragged in torn / cut off / worn out clothes. That sort of stuff. I had a pair of knee-high suede moccasin boots with fringe at the top, just below the knee. Actually, I had 2 pairs. One in black. One in brown. They were the most comfortable, warm boots I ever owned, long before the days of Uggs. My mother and I fought constantly over these boots, and it was a great triumph to me that she'd allowed me to spirit them away to school with me. Then one day I was approached by a teacher who told me that the teachers had had a discussion, and my boots weren't in the spirit of classroom dress. But I've read the dress code. There's nothing in there against them. I protested. I know. It's just been decided they don't meet the spirit of the dress code. she elaborated. But they're the right color. I know. They're the right fabric. Suede is allowed. I know. There's no restriction on boot length. You allow riding boots for the equestrian club. I know. Then why? I don't really know if I was angry or sad or an even split of both. But I was emotional. I wish I had better answers for you. She was a teacher I liked and I knew liked me. I realized it's why they'd sent her. I wasn't the sort to make a scene or cause a fuss. I was the sort to get even. Okay, I said and walked off. That night, I studied the dress code front to back. I read every sentence forwards and backwards. I said them out loud. I held up every article of clothing mentioned and studied it as if I were an alien who had nothing but the handbook and that piece of clothing to figure out how it was used by humans. It was a pretty strict handbook, I had to give them that. But they had made 2 mistakes. The handbook was oddly unspecific about which items of clothing were to be worn where. Nowhere did the handbook say we had to make an effort to actually look good. They discussed what articles of clothing needed to be what colors and how far they needed to extend in certain directions, skirts below the fingertips, socks above the ankles, sleeves past the elbows, etc. Shoes had to be reasonable colors like black or brown, like my boots were, or other earth tones. But it never said they couldn't be elf shoes, for example. Granted, elf shoes wouldn't be in the spirit of classroom dress. But I digress. I went to bed furious and with vicious ideas circling in my mind, debating whether or not I wanted to pull this particular trigger. Eventually I decided I'd wait until morning, and if I still felt that way, I would begin phase 1. The next morning, I woke up still pissed and began a mental list of the worst boys in my grade as I walked to breakfast. When I got there, I found a few of them and pointed out that the handbook specified that ties were to be tied in a single or double Windsor knot at all times unless it was a bow tie, and then it was to be tied in the traditional manner. Don't know what that's called. What it didn't specify is what part of the body it was to be affixed to. Nowhere did it specify that ties had to be tied around the neck. Just how they needed to be tied. I told them they didn't have to believe me. Just read their handbooks that night and do what they will with the information. The next day, there were ties on wrists, around eyeglasses, for heads, ankles, knees, thighs, tied then wrapped around hands as if to stop bleeding knuckles. Anywhere you could attach a Windsor knot to the human body, there was a boy in my school with a tie there. I was feeling pretty darn proud of myself. Phase 1 was a total success. The teachers were annoyed but most found it amusing. Until we got to math class. There was a kid in class without his tie on. The one who always wore a bow tie. The teacher walked up to his desk and looked down her nose at him. I understand you boys are having some fun with your ties today. And I think we've been pretty good sports. But if you know the handbook this well, then you know you at least have to be wearing a tie. He raised his head, smirked, and said, "Oh, I'm wearing one. You just can't see it." The class erupted. Now maybe he just had it under his pants on his ankle. Or tied around his elbow under his blazer. I'll never know. But he went down as the kid who came to class with his tie around his P***NIS. By the end of the day, I was a legend for finding the loophole, and he was a legend for what he had put the loophole around. By morning announcements, the dress code had been updated. We were all handed a printed page, so we couldn't claim we didn't know, to include specifications about ties around necks, and the fun was over for the boys. Phase 2 was a little more in-depth read on if you're not already bored. I studied the handbook and I took mental notes. I had been eyeing the most ridiculous pair of boots I'd ever seen at the mall. They were silver with holographic rainbow interlocking circles on them. They sported a 2-inch platform with a chunky 4-inch heel, and laced up just above the ankles. They looked like something Romy and Michelle would have worn in their final prom scene or Fran Drescher in The Nanny. Ungodly. I knew I couldn't wear them to class, but I wanted them for town days so bad. Like I said, after 9 years in uniform, I was having fun with fashion. I saved for months and visited them at the mall every chance I got. I had been slowly talking myself out of such a frivolous pair of boots, they were so expensive, but the loss of my favorite classroom boots had reinvigorated my lust for them. And right after my moccasins were revoked, I had managed to save up just enough to afford them. Lucky me. I practically skipped to the store to get my holographic rainbow platform boots that weekend. They were out of my size. I nearly cried. Until I noticed right next to them was the black patent leather version. Until now, they had seemed so tame by comparison. But the dress code had a special section about patent leather footwear. It was specifically permitted but only when wearing pants. There's an old, idiotic, belief that you can see the reflection of a girl's panties in patent leather shoes if she's wearing a skirt. So I could not wear the rainbow boots to class. But their sister boots in black patent leather with silver details were totally permitted, silver also being specifically permitted on shoes, as some might have grommets for laces. Bwahahaha. Still sporting the 2-inch platform and 4-inch heel, mind you. The school didn't have any limits on heel size, assuming high schoolers wouldn't want to be in heels all day, I guess. Something about losing the whimsy of the silver holographic rainbows also had the bonus effect of taking them from a club kid mood to a darker hooker boots realm. And to think, I would never have even considered the black pair if it weren't for my recent fascination with our dress code. The black boots also happened to be on discount, whereas my silver ones would have been full price. So I walked away with enough money to buy a pair of pants to wear with my new boots. A plan began to formulate in my devious brain. I invited my friends to join me at one of the local thrift stores, and we spent the afternoon hunting for the ugliest pants we could find that were still within the guidelines of the school dress code. And we did. They were bright orange polyester pants with little gray-green amorphous dots on them. Something akin to an incredibly tiny giraffe print. You almost couldn't make out the green, just that there was a pattern to the orange. Something about the two colors clashed enough that they almost vibrated in front of your eyes, making you half dizzy / half nauseated if you stared too long. And as luck would have it, I scored a deal on an orange shag sweater that was the exact same shade. I looked like a half-finished Sesame Street character on top and a Lost Disco reject on bottom. Oh, did mention they were slightly belled straight-legged orange polyester pants. I strolled into class on Monday looking like a rejected extra from Saturday Night Fever. My new platform boots had heavy wooden heels that clunked loudly everywhere I walked. I now stood 4 inches taller, making me stand out even more in the halls, and rivaling some of my teachers for presence in the classroom. I watched some of them glare at my new boots and began to figure out which ones had taken issue with my knee-high moccasins. I could tell the teachers who were getting a laugh out of it too. But I didn't stop there. It became my life's mission to seek out the most horrendous clothing and outfits I could concoct. I didn't care how I looked anymore. I had been so careful when I packed to make sure my clothes had all been suitable. And by their own admission, my boots were within the code. They just hadn't liked them. I had done my utmost to dress within their rules, and they had arbitrarily decided something wasn't good enough because they didn't like it. So now I wore something hideous every single day, so they had to see me in something nobody liked. Every single day. After all, what could they do? Just tell me every single day that I wasn't dressed appropriately but never in violation? At some point I would cry it was personal, maybe even racial. By their own admission it didn't violate the rules. And I was certain to never violate the rules. That just wasn't my style. Plus, at this point in a battle of wills, you can't afford to get sloppy and give the other side any advantage. Mom always said I was stubborn. The nice thing about boarding school is the girls are happy to share clothes around with anyone who will share back. So instead of just one closet, I had like 30 to pick from just in my dorm. Sure, most of my clothes matched each other by intent and planning. But they looked absurd with clothes picked by /4 other people. Someone might have a loud shirt they only wear with a black skirt. But I'd pair it with a printed skirt from 3 rooms down in clashing colors just because I could. Still within code. I wore those hooker boots anytime I didn't have on a skirt. I invested in more polyester than a school should legally be allowed to have on campus for fire safety reasons. I sought out every consignment, vintage, second-hand shop in town, and there were a lot. It was a largely hippie town, so the pickings were fantastic. I put together 3-piece suits with ties that made me look so butch they actually asked my mother if I was gay at her parent-teacher conference. Apparently dressing badly makes you a lesbian. I braided my bangs into a single braid and would put heavy earrings at the end to weigh it down, then swing it around like a pendulum over my desk or book during class by swirling my head, only if I was bored in a class of a teacher I suspected of costing me my boots. Anything and everything I could do to be visually assaulting to the senses, I did. At the above-mentioned parent-teacher meeting, they asked my mom if she could speak to me about my clothing, and she asked, surprised, if I was breaking any rules. They explained about the boots. Mom told me she laughed and said there was nothing she could do. If there's one thing my daughter hates, it's being punished for a rule she didn't know existed or a rule that never existed in the first place. If you want to make a rule today to stop her, she won't do it tomorrow. I bet you never saw those boots again. But you took away something she loved for seemingly no good reason. She sees that as a punishment even if you only saw it as a request. And now she's punishing you back. Simple as that. I suggest you just let it go and fix your handbook over the summer. Otherwise, you'll run out of paper, trying to print daily changes to keep up with the loopholes she'll find. My daughter loves finding loopholes. I should never have given her so many riddles as a child. Upon hearing this, they admitted that the only reason my new boots had been ignored thus far is that, this having been my reaction to the banning of the first pair, some were fearful what I might find to wear in retaliation if a second pair was banned. And, obedient student that I was, I never did wear my knee-high suede moccasins again. Random conclusion stuffs. They never did come after me for a single other dress code issue, except once when my skirt was too short, honestly not intentional, each teacher measured slightly differently. And I didn't return the next year for entirely unrelated reasons, so I don't know what changes they may have made. I'll include a photo of the boots. I've kept them all these years later just for the smile I get when I find them in the bottom of a box while looking for something else. And here's the last shirt I'm sure I have from those days. It's literally the ugliest piece of clothing I've ever owned, and I can't bring myself to throw it away, because I think of this story every time I see it and laugh. And I know somewhere is one photo of me in my orange shag outfit. If I ever find it, I will share that as well. I had a blast tearing the dress code to shreds. So remember to take your problems, turn them on their side, flip them inside out, look at life from a funny angle, and you never know what cracks you might find. And it's another great story of my awesome mom totally having my back. Though looking back as an adult, I'll bet she was a little pissed they banned her boots too. I mean, after all, if they had been more specific in the handbook, she could have kept them at home the entire time instead of in my closet at school, gathering dust. Miss you, Mom. At least it looked nicer, right? I used to manage a small franchised auto shop, and had a small office that nobody went in except me and the occasional employee. Customers were definitely never in it, which is a major point of this story. One of the guys from head office was down, one of those people that just has a job because he's a childhood friend of the owner. He had a very vague title and responsibilities. As far as we could tell, his job was to go around to the shops and complain about pointless things, while causing more trouble than he could ever hope to solve, while we were told we had to listen to him. Here's one example. I had a ridiculously large desk in my office. Besides the size, it was not much more than a table. 2 drawers and no dedicated PC shelf or cabinet. The surface was about 8 feet long by 3 feet deep. I had very little on this desk in comparison. I needed space for a couple sheets of paper at a time, a keyboard, mouse, and monitor. The tower for the desktop PC, which also was the server for the office, was also on the desk, naturally. He decided one day that having the tower on the desk looked bad, and was unprofessional. Which again was irrelevant as no customers ever saw it. He said I needed to move it, and he had a specific space in mind, right between the side of the desk and the wall. It didn't even look like it would fit, but he went and got a tape measure, and it pretty well exactly fit in that gap. There was as close to zero space as humanly possible on the left and right sides. The back was as close to the wall as possible as was allowed by the cables coming out the back, and then the front was open. In fairness, it did look okay there. In practice though, some of you may see the problem. The vents for the PC were on the left and right side, and were now right up against the wall and the desk. I pointed out that this was a bad idea, because it was certainly going to overheat there. I tried pretty hard to argue this, but he didn't believe that, and insisted I do it anyway, period. So, I did it, and sent him an email, with my boss and the IT guy CC'd, afterwards with a picture of the new setup, verifying this is what he wanted. He confirmed it for me very clearly, which is just what I wanted. A few days later, I come in one morning, and the PC is off. Normally it stays on overnight, as once you close the store in the evening, it runs a backup overnight, and then just stays on. It's no big deal at all that it's off when I get there, in the sense that after the backup, it's not needed until we open the next day, and it only takes a minute to start up. So I start it up, seems to be working fine. I check my email, and there's an auto-generated message from the software company, maybe? I don't recall exactly how it was generated, saying that last night's backup failed. A quick check of some logs, and the temperature got too hot while running the backup, and the tower shut itself off. I see that the email went to the IT guy and the bosses, so they're informed, assuming they read their emails. That's not my problem. If not, I'm not worried unless I get more instructions about it. I don't. The backup is, well, literally just a backup of certain info on the hard drive, so there's no immediate problem in the shop opening or running that day. Of course, this happens again that night, and the next. It was 4 or 5 days in a row. Then I get in one Friday morning, and the PC won't boot. I'm not an IT guy, but okay with computers, and it appears to me the hard drive is toast. We can't open the shop without the server working, so now of course it's an emergency. The bosses are now panicking, talking to tech support for the company supplying the proprietary software and PC. Eventually they decide that yes, the hard drive is toast. I can't remember exactly why, but there's something in the contract we had about having to get a new hard drive from the supplier. We can't just run to a Best Buy. That has to be overnight from over 2,000 miles away. Over a weekend. It cost a lot, in addition to being down for all of Friday. It arrives midday Saturday, and installing/setting up the software takes the rest of Saturday. Sunday, we're normally closed, so no loss of business there, but with the backup having failed for the preceding week, there's a whole ton of info that has to be manually entered from those days. The only people around with the access and knowledge to do so are me and my boss, and he sure as heck has never worked a weekend and doesn't intend to start now. The good parts are that I'm a single guy at the time with no plans, and I get paid hourly. And the way our pay works is I make time and a half for overtime, until I get to a certain amount of hours, which I manage to do Friday and Saturday. After that, I get double and a half. Which I did for about 10-12 hours on Sunday, while doing slightly tedious, but very easy, data entry work, in peace and quiet except for YouTube. The company lost 2 days of income, ended up paying me the equivalent of about 50 hours work for about 16 to 20 actual very easy hours of work, and I had a nice paper trail for next time this idiot had a bad idea to implement. I have no idea what trouble, if any, that guy got in for coming up with such a dumb plan, but probably not much more than a basic yelling at being the owner's best friend. And all I had to do was do exactly what I was told. It was easily a $20,000 mistake to improve the look of a PC that nobody ever sees, which of course ended up back on my desk afterwards. Sure thing, boss. Backstory, I put in a resignation recently. Long story short, the company was not a good cultural fit for me. I met with my former boss to resign since I felt it would be best to do it in person with HR present. When I explained the cultural and consistent failure of the team to communicate despite my offering solutions and pointing out the problems as part of why I was resigning, I think they took it personally. They immediately accused me of blindsiding them, despite my giving 3 weeks' notice, and immediately began attacking me for never coming to them for a sit-down meeting. However, the boss is never there, and I have repeatedly mentioned via text and email the issues going on, as well as to the rest of management. There was also an issue with managers repeatedly asking me to perform tasks that I had never been trained for, which could result in someone getting hurt, and violates local laws. I would always go find the next trained person, and I think they viewed that as me being lazy, despite asking for training for months. I don't know how they interpreted that as feeling unsafe and uncomfortable, but that is the phrase they used. They kept saying I accept your resignation, but if you feel so unsafe I don't see why you need to come back for 3 weeks. Throughout the whole meeting I felt like I was being blamed and attacked for things totally beyond my control. It was like I had a target on my back from day one, and it was all coming out now. Malicious compliance time. There are a couple programs I run. 1 is our social media page. 2 is our virtual visit program. Many of our clients have only been able to see their families through video calls, which I set up. I wrote the company program. No one added the shared calendar, even after me offering to do it for them, so no one knows what the schedule is. I began the meeting by stating I want to focus on transitioning these programs, however my boss wasn't having it, and was even cutting me off. Our families were furious when there was an error with the initial info in the e-news. I did not write this LOL, so imagine how angry they will be when the video program crashes and burns. But clearly boss wasn't willing to listen. So, I'm not going back for the final weeks, and my phone is going straight to voicemail. Did I mention that we are a residential facility, so our money comes from happy families? And we have 7 calls for the remainder of this week? If you made it to the end of the video, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe and share, and we will see you in the next video.